The final ride for this version of the Big 12, our conference previews continue on the College Game Day Podcast. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel ready to roll in the Big 12 right now. Pete, 14 teams competing in the Big 12, couple on their way out in Texas and Oklahoma after this year, more on their way in next year with the corner schools from the Pac-12 that will join next year. But this last run for the Big 12, formed in the late 90s after the demise of the old Southwest Conference, could be what it's been the last couple of years. You could win or lose just about anywhere you go because there's a lot of balance in this conference, even among some, at least a couple of the newcomers.
Yeah, I think the greatest part about this iteration of the Pac-12 that we're in and we're going to is that everybody wakes up thinking they can win it. So it's sort of designed for chaos in a very real way. There's not everyone's on the same level of the caste system, especially once Texas and Oklahoma go. It is just going to be an unpredictable mud fight. And I think one of the things I like about the Big 12 is sort of has the league has a little bit of a bandit soul, right? It gave us Mike Leach. It gave us, Art Briles. It gave us all these innovators, these different guys. You're in these wisps of towns and you try different things. And in the Big 12, geographically clunky and a little weird. It is just kind of a melting pot of different types of football and styles of football. And we've had 6 different teams play for the title in the last 3 years, and there's nothing stopping that stat from continuing to trend that way.
And a couple of teams that will stick around played for it last year, often forgotten because TCU played for the national championship. Kansas State is the reigning champion, and while I would like to give the champion its due to start, I feel like that with all of the offseason buzz and the talk and the early season game, week 2 in Tuscaloosa, that the place to start is with Texas. Steve Sarkisian in his 3rd year. They return a ton on offense. Every guy that started on the offensive line last year, all back, over 100 career starts. Same 5 started on the offensive line. Quinn Ewers has cut the mullet. He's gotten in much better shape. Was the highest rated recruit to play for Texas since Vince Young. And then, of course, Arch Manning is there in the wings as well. They've added some guys from the portal to try to help out. Added A.D. Mitchell, the Georgia wide receiver who has a touchdown in all 4 of the Bulldog college football playoff games in which he has participated, to go along with Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington. There's a lot to like about Texas.
Talked to a scout last week, and he said Texas will almost certainly have 8 players drafted as a baseline, 4 on offense and 4 on defense. And those are NFL-type numbers that are when Texas was competing for the national title. So the talent is clearly here, Rece. And that doesn't include Kelvin Banks, who is the best young left tackle, underclassmen left tackle in the country. He has a chance to be a top 10 pick in 2025. Texas has not been Texas because it has failed on the lines. And their defensive line right now is filled with draftable talent. Their offensive line is growing up together and is filled with draftable talent. A.D. Mitchell has been the buzz of camp. And the case for Texas winning this league, I think, revolves around Quinn Ewers. A quick aside, we have a game day story coming up on Quinn Ewers. I went to his condo in Austin for a story last week. He has 2 giant deer heads. I don't know if they're bucks or elks or antelopes or whatever. One of which he killed with a bow. He also stopped eating Chick-fil-A, which I think we've talked about at some point, but I know that would probably hurt your heart a little bit, Rece, your southern heart. You don't agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can still trim body fat and get in great shape and not deny yourself one of the wonderful pleasures of life, which is a Chick-fil-A sandwich. So, but if that's what Quinn needs to do, I would say cut the mullet, but not cut the Chick-fil-A. That would be
fair enough.
Be the winner.
There was an interesting moment when we were there filming, he and a bunch of his teammates having dinner from a local sub shop. So we're kind of asking questions. We're taping it, and the guys are teasing him about his hair, his teammates. It was Baron Sorrell and a couple of the O linemen. Hayden Connor was there. Kelvin Banks was there, and they were busting his chops about the line. And they're like, "Why'd you cut your hair, Quinn? Why'd you cut your hair, Quinn?" And he just kind of was like, had to grow up, bro. And I just thought it was like a very probably much more complex thing distilled in to the moment. So if he does grow up, bro, like says he has, and he appears to have physically, and Sark has been effusive in his praise for how he's played this spring, we could see a Texas contending, stop us if you've heard this before, for the college football playoff. They could be back. Maybe.
Win total's 9.5. I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit and take the over, but I do think they barely go over. I think they lose 2 or potentially the championship game, maybe 3. I don't think they make the college football playoff, but I do think they go over 9.5. What do you think?
Can I take the over and still pick K-State to win the league? Because I kind of want to pick K-State to win the league.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I just didn't know if the math didn't work, and then some analytic guy would write me a nasty thing on Twitter. So
no, you can do it because depending, I assume you'll take the over with Kansas State, and that would just mean that they win the head-to-head game, and then maybe the championship game. This win total is prior to championship week. At least that's my impression of it. I think it is. So
I think win totals generally, and I'm not a gambler, so I don't know the nuances of it because I've never had to invest. Thank God we have Stanford Steve, by the way, on Game Day right now, because he could answer this question for us very quickly. But I don't think win totals count for conference title games. I only think they. So I think it's there. But yeah, I'm gonna go over. Talent wins. You can't compile this much talent and it not win. If it would be an indictment of Steve Sarkisian if this isn't a 10-win team. Because they have 10-win talent.
I know they're going to play at a high level against Alabama. Here are the games that and they'll be ready against Oklahoma.
Do you believe, this is a good podcast topic, I'm sorry to cut you off. If Quinn doesn't get hurt, does Texas beat Alabama last year?
They'd find a way to
Why?
They'd find a way to lose it. Alabama would have settled them down, would change the way the game goes. Game goes the way it went. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Because Bryce Young left the field, or did not leave the field last year in the fourth quarter with his team trailing, So if they had scored more, he would have scored more. It came down to whether they were going to make the field goal or not. That was it.
There's a once a decade Alabama Texas quarterback injury, podcast topic that you could talk about forever, and that's this decade's. So, just don't bring it up to McElroy. The Colt get hurt one to McElroy. He really jumps on that. He's kind of made a living on that.
Well, you know why? Because nobody knew. And look, Colt was hurt; he couldn't throw the ball. And that was extremely unfortunate. McElroy played that game with broken ribs. He only threw for 50-something yards. They didn't throw much because he played with broken ribs. So it's he'd been hurt previously, so it had hampered the preparation, I think, in that, at least in the passing game regard. So we've got Texas going over right behind Texas, and I promise we'll get to your preseason pick of Kansas State for the championship. Oklahoma also headed to the SEC, 6-7 last year in Brent Venables' first year. But much more productive in games in which Dylan Gabriel was able to start and finish. They averaged 37 points a game and over 500 yards in those games. Gabriel is back. They have some question in terms of weapons for him. They do have Andrel Anthony, who transferred from Michigan, made a big play in the Michigan State game a couple of years ago, but was never really the consistent guy. You talked on an earlier podcast, Pete, about Michigan having Stanford transfers on the offensive line. So does Oklahoma. They've got Walter Rouse, who transferred in there. They got Deshaun McCullough, who was an Indiana transfer on defense, who was a highly thought of guy. I'm a little bullish on Oklahoma. Talk to someone who's seen them practice a little bit lately. The win total's a little bit high for a team coming off 6-7. But you kind of look at the schedule. They've got Texas at the State Fair. They do have to go to Kansas and to Stillwater, which historically hasn't been a problem. And then they won last year when Oklahoma State sort of stepped in the empty elevator shaft. things stack up pretty well for them, but I can't quite make that big a leap all the way to 10 wins. So I'm going to take the under at Oklahoma. Give me a quick synopsis on them and where you are over under with the Sooners.
I'm going to take the under as well because I give Brent Venables a lot of credit. There's been 2 top 10 recruiting classes. He is trying to build Clemson Midwest there, and the talent influx indicates it's there. I just think they need one more year to let the talent settle in. There's a number about like new players in their building the last 2 years. It's like 70 players. I mean, they've really overhauled the whole thing, and it needed it, especially defensively. I just think that it's going to take a year for them to grow up, Rece, when it all comes down to it. And so I obviously like Dylan Gabriel. I'm glad you brought up Andrel Anthony because he is intriguing. Talented guy. Drake Stoops has been around forever. He's solid, but he's a possession guy. So I just think they need a little bit, maybe more skill talent, and then they need the defense to show, especially up front, that they can battle. That's where, if I'm going to the SEC, that's where I'm really worried right now if I'm Oklahoma.
The reigning champion of the Big 12, the Kansas State Wildcats, Chris Kleiman in his 5th year. They beat TCU in that classic game last year, but now they're coming back. No Deuce Vaughn, no Felix Anudike-Uzomah, no Julius Brents on defense. But they do return Cooper Beebe up front and all 5 of their offensive line starters. They also return another guy who was previously a starter who missed a year with injury. They've got Trayshawn Ward transferring from Florida State. They got DJ Giddens, who's a sort of a bowling ball kind of guy, or he's a bruiser, among the better backs in the country after contact. Got a few holes to fill on defense for sure. But you say that you like them as Big 12 champions. So you start with your assessment of Kansas State. And just for your information, the win total for the Wildcats is 8.5.
Ooh, I like that. That is ripe. So I think it starts with Cooper Beebe and company up front, Rece, right? Cooper Beebe is the best interior lineman in college football. This was a really bad guard class, right? You called the draft, so you probably remember. It was Osiris Torrance was the first guard taken, and I believe it was early 2nd round, right? Mm-hmm. I just feel like that group has a pretty remarkable amount of starts among it, that offensive line, and there's a bunch of 6-year guys who've come back, and I really feel like they can win going up front, and Will Howard is one of the best young quarterbacks in college football. I guess he's not that young because he did play some of the COVID year in injury, but he came on as much last year as any quarterback in the country. He was one of the most improved players in the Big 12, and there was a lot of optimism when I was through there in the spring that he can carry that on. Obviously, the Deuce Vaughn dynamic, he was so explosive, is going to be difficult, but it's a lot easier to replace skill guys like that when you have an established quarterback, a rock-solid offensive line, and a draftable tight end in Ben Sinnott. So I just think, by the way, Chris Kleiman has won, I think, 7 national championships as a coordinator, a head coach. So, the guy knows what he's doing. He knows how to build a team. So I take the steadiness of that, and I'll give you one other little name out of the blue, like I did for Oregon State in our last pod. The name VJ Payne, the safety, who's from Georgia, is one of these young guys who could really, really blow up in the next year or two. So just that's another one. When you spend a little time on campus, you get a little bit of the spring scuttlebutt and kind of some coaches being honest. That's a guy who really could come. Now Kobe Savage is obviously an established guy who's one of the better secondary guys in that league. So I am excited and bullish on K-State, and losing Felix is a big loss, but they feel like the defensive line room is one of the best rooms in their program. So when in doubt, pick Chris Kleiman. He's won a lot more conference championships than Steve Sarkisian.
8.5 the number. You're going over. I will join you in the over. I'm not quite as bullish as you are. I'm not picking them to win the conference again. Really tricky 2-week early October stretch in Stillwater on a Friday night, at Texas Tech. After that, then TCU at home. have to go to Texas as well. But 8.5.
Don't overlook Troy either, by the way. That's a scary game.
Yeah, and they go to Missouri, too. I mean, they absolutely stomped Missouri last year.
Sledgehammer.
I mean, mismatch of epic proportions. But, there'll be, as my old friend Digger Phelps likes to say, a payback game for Missouri, road game, early season. But I think 8.5 is way too low for that team with a veteran offensive line, veteran quarterback, and a great coach. So I'll take the over for the reigning Big 12 champions. Team that played for the national championship last year, TCU Horned Frogs. Sonny Dykes had to change at coordinator when Garrett Riley went to Clemson. Kendall Briles came over from Arkansas. There is certainly something amusing given the angst and animosity and vitriol between those two programs back in the day that there is a Briles coaching at TCU. But they lost everybody on offense. Chandler Morris is back, but the interior of the offensive line has to be rebuilt. They hit the portal hard for both skill players and in the middle. What do you think about TCU? I mean, look at this win total is 7.5 for Sonny Dykes in his second year.
Wow. I like TCU. I like Sonny Dykes. I also just have to acknowledge the spate of questions, which starts with Chandler Morris. You wonder if Quentin Johnston did so much for them. He not only stretched the field, but he opened everything else up. This is probably the last time I can man crush Quentin Johnston on this podcast, Rece. So I just want to make sure I get my last sonnet dedicated to my favorite player in college football last year. Their defense was good enough. And if you don't have Max Duggan making plays and you lose such dynamic skill, good enough can all of a sudden go sideways on you. So I am going to take the under on the Horned Frogs. I feel like they could struggle a bit. 5 losses is a lot of losses, but I don't know. It will be very interesting to see when they open with Colorado. We'll learn a lot. That's one of obviously the most intriguing early season games. Colorado, as you've probably heard, likes to recruit in Texas. They switched leagues so they could do it more in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know how much Sonny Dykes has liked that. So I do think there's some simmering overtones between those two staffs right now. So it would be interesting to see if Colorado does struggle, as we mentioned on the Pac-12 podcast, as possible with the offensive style they play. It'll be interesting to see how that game is handled in its late stages.
They feel like a 7-5 team. They pulled some games out of the fire last year. I sort of think that win total might be a hair low, so I'm really tempted to go over. But I'm going to join you in the under and think that maybe a break or two that went their way last year goes against them, and they're probably looking at 7-5 with all of the changes that they have up front, the coaching change and all of that they'll be facing coming off that appearance in the national championship game. Mentioned by extension, Briles coaching at TCU. So let's move down the road then to Waco, and Dave Aranda followed up that great year, the Big 12 championship, with a 6-7 record. They have a new defensive coordinator as well. They return Blake Shapen at quarterback. They return Richard Rece at running back. They have Oklahoma State's leading rusher from last year, Dominic Richardson, at running back for Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator, in that reliable, violent offense, the RVO that he prefers. Baylor, a little bit of an interesting case because they sort of fell back to the pack last year, but their win total is 7-5, is 7.5. And they've got a non-conference game against Utah. They get Texas at home. They don't have Oklahoma on the schedule this year. They do have to go to Kansas State, and they have to go to TCU. They have to go to UCF, which I think can be a difficult game, more difficult than perhaps some in the Big 12 might recognize until they get a good look at Gus Malzahn's team. So 7-5, 7.5. I'm going to go 7-5 and take the under by a half game on the Bears.
So I'm gonna pivot a little bit here and take a little bit of a risk and go over on the Bears. I feel like what could have gone wrong did go wrong for them last year, and I'm gonna make I hope our friend Stanford Steve listens to this, because this is one of my long shot calls that I'm about to make going into the preseason with a little bit of education from what has happened at Bear camp. If you want a good long shot for Big 12 Player of the Year, I have heard unbelievable things about Dominic Richardson there, which is a little bit outlandish to say because he might not even be the starter, but he could well be the best player in that program. And look, if we know how Jeff Grimes likes to run offense and we know how Dave Aranda wants to play, there's going to be running the ball and there's going to be complementary football. And the O-line, I think, is solid. And I really think that he could be the bell cow to carry them as Blake Shapen grows up for us. So that is my bold Big 12 call. I have no idea if they even have odds on that kind of stuff. Perhaps we'll learn when ESPN Bet comes into our lives that information will be more easily available to me, Rece. But I do feel like he could be a special breakout kind of player.
So you're going over. I'm going under, although I think they'll be.
I just like to disagree with you.
Well, they'll be right. They'll be right on that number. Yeah. Here's the team that I think is going to not be good enough to win the Big 12, but have a major say in who does. Texas Tech. Second year under Joey McGuire. They do lose Tyree Wilson, high draft pick, but we mentioned in a previous podcast, a former Oregon quarterback, Tyler Shuck, just hasn't been able to stay healthy. They've got a bunch of dudes coming back on the offensive line, over 140 career starts. They're shaking some things up on defense in terms of moving some guys around. They've got, I think, 15 super seniors. They did pull a bunch of games out of the fire last year and won some games in overtime. Texas Tech also at a 7.5 win total. They open at Wyoming, Oregon at home, early trip to West Virginia, have to go to BYU, have to go to Kansas, and have to go to Texas. But, it's really tough to play in Lubbock. I'm going to take the over with Texas Tech, probably by a half game, and figure that among those 8 wins, I expect them to get it. They will clip somebody this year that will completely destroy a dream. That's the most Texas Tech thing ever, right?
It very much is. The spirit of Mike Leach will smile from up above as he asks for his money from Texas Tech, which he still wants in the afterlife, I can assure you. I wouldn't claim I knew Mike Leach particularly well, but I knew him well enough to know he really still wanted his money from Texas Tech. So, but he also liked a good upset, and I think he would appreciate the spirit of Joey McGuire that he has brought. Did you see the clip where he scaled the crane, Rece?
I did see it.
Yeah, he's good energy, Joey McGuire. He's been fun to cover. I'm going to agree with you on the over here. I am bullish on big offense, which like you said, it leaves you the ability to pull an upset, and it also leaves you susceptible sometimes when things misfire to lose to a team that you perhaps shouldn't lose to. So I do think that Jalen Hutchings, their defensive lineman, will not be picked as high as Tyree Wilson because he was picked ridiculously high. But he could be a first-round type guy, identity on defense guy. And when was the last time Texas Tech had big-time defensive prospects in that way? So there's a system there. There's talented guys. They're developing clearly under Joey McGuire. That was obviously the theme of Tyree Wilson in his draft story. So. Yeah, I look forward to Tyler Shuck and, the experienced receivers, Bradley and Price, rolling through and putting up some numbers. And I'm not ready to call it yet, but the Ducks should be on alert when they go to Lubbock.
It'll be a big game.
It's too bad that game is in a different week because that would be a fun college game day game.
No doubt.
Did you do one in Lubbock?
I've called games in Lubbock, and I've done game day basketball in Lubbock. But we haven't taken game day there since I've been there. Shuck, the one thing I didn't realize, and you had been hurt a lot, they were 8-1 in games that he started, but he's had difficulty staying healthy, and we'll see, how well he flourishes in this offense and whether he can pull one of those upsets early. Oklahoma State, always a little bit of an interesting case. Absolutely went in the tank down the stretch of last season. I mean, got clobbered a bunch of times late. I think they lost something like 5 of their last 6. They don't have Texas. They don't have TCU. They get Kansas State and Oklahoma at home. They play all of the teams coming over from the American. They've got, who's going to be the quarterback? Is it, going to be Garrett Ringel, Gunnar Gundy, or Alan Bowman, who put up numbers in the Big 12 before his run of injuries at Texas Tech and spent the last couple of years as a backup at Michigan. But I think the most fascinating thing that Oklahoma State has done, or Mike Gundy has done again, his coaching tree is remarkable. He's hired a man called Brian Nardo as defensive coordinator from Gannon College. It's his latest in a long line of discovering guys from Mike Yursich to Sean Gleason. And, he's not afraid to go outside the norm to hire guys he doesn't know. And it's worked out really well for him in the past. And I wonder if maybe with, a guy like Colin Oliver out there, a guy like Kendall Daniels on defense, you got a Tulsa transfer and Justin Wright, who's put up big numbers. They do lose 8 of their top 10 tacklers. They've got a whole new look over there, new energy, new vibe. Oklahoma State, what do you think of the Pokes? The number's 6.5 as you contemplate that, by the way.
This is, again, people are listening to our preseason prediction podcast, so we certainly don't want to subvert the entire enterprise that our podcast is based on. But, there are some of these schools where you just don't know, Rece. Now, I think Alan Bowman, I'm pretty confident in saying Alan Bowman will be the quarterback from talking to folks there. They lost so many guys to the portal. Richardson at tailback, I think they lost 3 of their top 5 returning receivers who all went to real places. Spencer Sanders left. There are certainly overtones of a culture issue there. And maybe it's an NIL issue. Maybe it's Gundy. Maybe it's guys don't want to be in Stillwater and they have better options and they want to go to a more urban place as opposed to a more rural place to go to school. But you can't look at the totality of those losses and think this thing's going well right now. So I'm going to take the under on that. And yeah, they have how could you possibly project what their defense is going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure some of our colleagues will be watching the Gannon film to. The poor Central Arkansas GAs trying to dig up that Gannon film to try to get an edge for their opener September 2nd. But they have a tricky schedule. So at Arizona State is a game I think conventional people think they should win, but that'll be a difficult game. And then South Alabama is really good. They were really good last year. They were nose-hair winning from the Sun Belt. And then they go to Iowa State, which may not have any players left. We'll talk about them next or soon here. But that's all of a sudden you could be and then you have K-State at home. And I believe K-State just completely blasted them into smithereens last year.
48-0.
Yeah. One of just the most. I thought K-State's really good, right? We've been very complimentary of them. In no way did I wake up that Saturday and think they'd win that game 48-0. I mean, if you look at Mike Gundy's offensive history, they score points. They had a really good offense for the first 6 weeks of last season. They were in the top 20 in the country. So it just something really went sideways there. And I am going to believe it's different when I see it's different. So I'm taking the under.
I'm going to take the under. I really, really wanted to take the over and go to 7, but the early season games, the South Alabama game that you mentioned is tricky. If they get out 1-2, that could get away quickly. So I'm gonna go under with you as well. Let's get one of the newcomers that I think actually has a chance to finish maybe a little higher in the standings, maybe even contend for a spot in that Big 12 championship game if things were to go just right. UCF. What do you think about that? As Gus Malzahn is back into the Power 5. Do you know that reference, UCF? What do you think about that?
I don't.
Okay. We started this years ago, and it's become a thing among UCF fans over the years. There were even signs that said this when we went on College Game Day. When I did Thursday night games with Jesse Palmer and David Pollack, Jesse's a master storyteller. So he was telling the story about a former teammate at Florida who had been a highly recruited guy, but I guess that things weren't really working out for him. And there was kind of this feeling that maybe he just really enjoyed being a Gator and hadn't really made the necessary sacrifices to make the big step up. So it wasn't really working out for him at Florida. So one day Jesse runs into him and he goes, this guy says, "I'm going to transfer." And Jesse goes, "No way, really? You're going?" And as Jesse tells the story much better than I will, he said the guy looks at him dead in the eye, has this real serious face, stern jaw, eyes sort of squinted together, and says, "I'm going to UC." And Jesse thinks he's about to say LA because they were good then in the late 90s. He was a highly recruited guy. But instead the guy said, "I'm going to UCF. What do you think about that?" And so that became the thing. And it was like, whenever I would say UCF in the highlights, I would say, "What do you think about that?" And, this was Jesse's story, but I co-opted it for the good of lines over highlights in the studio on Saturdays. And it's become a thing. So I say that UCF has a chance. What do you think about that? With John Rice Plumlee and maybe DeMarcus Bowman finally gets loose for them. They were really good in the American last year. Tulane was able to beat them for the championship. I think this is a team that could cause some problems in the Big 12, Gus's style, which, that won't be a big shock for the people in the league. They're used to tempo and running quarterbacks and all of that. But they got a lot of guys coming back. Win total's only 6.5. I'm going to take the over with UCF.
Yeah, I'm going to roll the over there too. If you look at their starting lineup, they're all SEC transfers and like familiar names, Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson. These are like high-end athletes who just didn't get a chance at other places. And I think that's going to be a lot of UCF's identity until they can really start to recruit to the Big 12 and establish themselves in Central Florida in that way. So, I trust Gus and the thought on John Rice Plumlee is Darren Hinshaw coming in as the OC opens things up as a passer for him. We know he can scoot, right? He was scooting in Oxford and he's scooted in Orlando. Can he spread the magic bean around a little bit better and maybe be in a little bit more refined offensive passing system? Probably not Gus's specialty, the refined part.
I would say not.
And go on out and do that. Welcome to the Big 12. You get to go to K-State to open your league schedule, and they have to return that Boise game. I covered the UCF Boise game in Orlando. It was like an opening Thursday game. Might have been a Friday. And it was thunderstorms. It was a crazy game, mostly memorable. UCF won, came back big and won in multiple overtimes. There was like a 3-hour rain delay, and Hank Bachmeier zoomed into one of his classes from the locker room in his uniform because the delay was so long and he was missing class. So I'll never forget that. That's it was a wild game, but that was the one thing I was like, whoa. And so somebody took a screenshot of the Zoom and it went viral as he went back and played the game. So
there is one little nugget, the final nugget on UCF. Last time they entered a new conference, they won it and went to the Fiesta Bowl. Just saying. Not making that prediction. Am taking the over on 6.5. Not a new team in the Big 12, but one that has suddenly gone into a bit of a tailspin. Iowa State coming off a 4-8, 1-8 record, only won one game in the Big 12 last year. And as you probably know by now, their returning quarterback, Hunter Deckers, away from the team, caught up in all of the gambling issues that have ensnared a number of players at Iowa State and Iowa. We've had some fun with the backup kicker at Iowa, who I think bet the under in the Cyhawk game. But no joking matter when you lose your really only experienced quarterback there. They do have some offensive linemen returning. They turned the ball over a bunch last year. They were -7 in turnovers. They continually lose one score games. They were 1-6 in one score games last year. They're 3-11 in one score games the last 2 years. And Iowa State seems to be at a really difficult spot right now. The win total for them is 5.5. They're at Oklahoma. They're at Baylor. They're at BYU and at Kansas State. Texas at home. I'm taking the under on the Cyclones.
So we actually have relevant news that's just breaking since we started taping the podcast. We're here on Thursday afternoon for everybody listening. So this may be, by the time you folks listen to this, it may be already there. But the story just broke that another group of Iowa State and Iowa football players were charged in the sports wagering situation that's ensnared Hunter Deckers and others there. The Iowa State group includes 4 starters. Starting running back Jarrell Brock, also Isaiah Lee, tight end Deshaun Hanukkah, right tackle Jacob Remsburg. So how that will reverberate to the team right now is too early to tell, but that is just another brutal blow to Iowa State. And, there was a case that they could bounce back because of the close games, huge staff changes. Deckers is better, but yeah, you have some dudes that are going to miss some games, right? So a really, really ambiguous start to that season because you just don't know who's going to be on the field for the Northern Illinois game. And they have to play Iowa in week 2 where there's going to be a ton of suspensions. I will say very early buzz guy who could be a first-round pick who probably is in the household name is TJ Tampa, the DB at Iowa State. He was a very good defensive back in the Big 12. He is not impacted in all this, and I think he'll be one of the better defensive players in the whole league. But right now, I will go under. But as we often warn you on game day, do not invest until there is clarity on who will play.
I was going to ask you about TJ Tampa. I think Pro Football Focus listed him as one of the best players in the Big 12, certainly the best player on the Iowa State roster. So that at least there is that good news for them. Kansas had a great run to start the season last year. Lance Leipold has eyes everywhere. I was giving a speech the other night, nowhere near Kansas. In fact, I was in Tuscaloosa. And as soon as I finished my speech, I have a text from Lance Leipold who said, "Hey, thanks for giving the Jayhawks some love in your speech tonight." And I was like, wow, how did you know that? And it turns out Nate Oates, the Alabama basketball coach, was there, and they were together at Buffalo, and Nate had let him know. So Lance is spreading his wings just about to all corners of college football in an effort to elevate Kansas. You've probably seen the video online of the upgrade in their facilities. They've got Jalen Daniels back. They've got Jason Bean, who played well while Daniels was hurt behind him. They've got over 130 starts returning on the offensive line. You've got Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw back from injury. Weren't very good on defense last year, but they do return 90% of their offensive production. Now, there's not a lot of room for error, not a lot of margin for error. Probably the highest win total Kansas has had in years is sitting at 6.5. If they could win that Illinois game week 2 at home, there are a lot of good week 2 games sort of under the radar.
Yeah.
If they could somehow pull that one off and get started 4-0 before they have to go to Texas, this could be a really, really good season for them. They have Oklahoma coming to Lawrence. They have UCF coming to Lawrence. They play Texas Tech and don't have to go to Lubbock. That's always a positive. And they have Kansas State at home as well. I'm gonna take the over by a half game. I'm gonna ride with Rock Chalk and say they can get to 7 this year with that dynamic quarterback.
I had an interesting conversation with an NFL scout the other day who, there's the debate. We've had it on this podcast. We'll have it again. Who'll be that third quarterback? Mm-hmm. He did not say Jalen Daniels, but he said, boy, am I intrigued by Jalen Daniels, who could put himself in that conversation. So I don't know if I'd thought of Jalen Daniels through that prism of like a big-time NFL guy, but he has a chance with another year like he had a start last year. And again, he was the Heisman favorite, I would say, the week we rolled in with Game Day, right, Rece? Like, I mean, that was not an outlandish state. I mean, he was a top 5 guy.
I don't know if I'd go that far to say favorite, but I would say he was certainly in the mix for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what he can do back healthy. Devin Neal quit baseball this spring to stay focused on football. Lawrence's finest will will be a little bit more locked in. And, that offense, Andy Kotelnicki's offense, was really fun. Like, it grew, it morphed. So I think with a year of knowing what he has in Jalen Daniels and a year of the skill growing around him, a guy like Quentin Skinner, who's caught like 7 million balls for them, I really feel like they can they can grow and flourish. So I'm gonna do that too. I worry about the D-line. I think that's probably, if you gave every Big 12 coach truth serum, that's what he would say. But I think they can outscore some folks and have some fun. I agree on the Illinois game. That will be a lot of fun that Friday night going into that weekend.
So we're both somewhat bullish on Kansas after they had a resurgence. BYU is back in a conference after their independent sojourn for several years, coming off an 8-5 season. They lose Jaron Hall. They lose Lopini Katoa up front. They lost a couple of transfers as well, but they get Keaton Slovis in, who's making his latest stop to presumably be the starter at quarterback for the Cougars. Number of other transfers. They have big tight end Isaiah Rece, who's a really good player. They've got a transfer from Oregon, who is a terrific offensive lineman. And I hope I get this name right. This is Kingsley Salmatea, I believe is correct. But, that was a guy who was a highly sought after guy when he came out of high school and has played well for BYU. They've got 78 career starts on the offensive line. A lot of them were places other than BYU. This is a bit of an unknown for me too. The over-under number on the Cougars is sitting at a 6. They've got to go to Arkansas and go to Kansas early. They go to TCU and Texas. West Virginia, who's probably way down, but not necessarily an easy trip. Get Oklahoma at home. I'm gonna take the over, but barely, just because it's 6. Because I think it's more likely that they win 7 than they win 5. If I think 6 sounds about right, but if I've got to go one way or the other, I'm going to go over. More likely they pull out one, with that being a tough place to play in Provo when the Big 12 teams come to visit them.
Well, Jim Galliero, our game day producer, is going to give you a stern talking to in week 0 because you brought up BYU and did not bring up Puka Nacua.
Puka Nacua, a staple of the game day checkdown.
He was a staple. Puka Nacua is part of our lives, but we have to learn to grow without him. He was drafted. Jim was very excited when Puka got drafted. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of projection that comes with BYU and coming here. Big Kingsley is going to be a really high. He's a top 50 player in college football. He'll be a high draft pick at left tackle. Cody Epps has been a really productive receiver for them. I have a general belief in Keaton Slovis that the talent is there and the system wasn't right for him at Pitt. I just feel like with that and with some of the defensive switches. Now, Jay Hill, the new DC, who was the head coach at Weber State, is a very, very good defensive coordinator, is a very, very good coach. And that unit clearly needed an upgrade last year. But I think the combination of the unknowns, the combination of them moving up in class, if you will, playing more Big 12 games, I'm going to take the under on that. But I kind of agree that the number is about in the right place. But I can see them winning 5 or, needing to win in Stillwater in the final week to get to 6.
The coach who's probably under the most pressure in the Big 12 to win is Neil Brown. They've got another new offensive coordinator at West Virginia. Chad Scott takes over, promoted from the run game coordinator. They'll go with Garrett Green, who's a pretty good runner. CJ Donaldson, who we saw on opening Thursday night against Pittsburgh last year, was really impressive. They have some experience on the offensive line as well, but they were outgained by nearly 100 yards per game in Big 12 play last year. And, West Virginia's win total sits at 4.5, and they've got a non-conference game to open at Penn State. They've got Pitt, also out of conference, and they're at TCU, they're at Oklahoma, they missed Texas, which probably won't hurt. They're at UCF. I'm going to have to take the under on West Virginia and go under 4.5.
Yeah, I'm probably going to have to take the under too. I'm a believer in experience and synchronicity on offensive lines. So that was the case. Neil Brown actually said at media day that he was pissed off that they got picked last, which I liked, by the way, because like at least show some like real emotion. Like that's nobody wants to get picked last in anything. So and his big case for them was with C.J. Donaldson at tailback, who we really liked, combined with that O line. So they could certainly grind out some games. I am pretty concerned with the defense still. There's some questions there. I do wonder if Nico, I know how to pronounce this because I had to do a Big 12 media today. Martial, the highly regarded quarterback from Arizona, who's been there, eventually does win that job. He's supposed to be a really talented cat. So, I just feel like if you are trying to save your job as Neil Brown is this year, the schedule maker is unkind, right? You have at Penn State to start, and this is maybe the best Penn State team in the 20 years that I've done this. And then you are home Pitt. Look, Pitt is like investing in bonds, man. They are solid. Like, they're going to be good on defense. They're never going to score 60 on you, but they're really sound. And then you got Texas Tech coming in. And then you go to TCU. It's just like, boy, like it could dogpile on you quick if you don't show well in state college. So I'm going to pick the under. I will say, we've certainly, as we've gamed out our season on game day, we've certainly pondered the ABC primetime game that Saturday night in Pittsburgh. I'm sorry,
in Morgantown. Yeah.
In Morgantown, yes. I'm trying to think, Rece, does anyone on our show go to West Virginia? Do we have any West Virginia grads on the show?
We do have one rather prominent West Virginia alum in Pat McAfee. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Pat went to West Virginia. He never brings that up.
Oh, what a surprise.
How do you think the crowd would like to see Pat?
Oh, that would just be electric, man. I hope they play well enough. That would be a great stop. Show hasn't been to Morgantown since I have hosted it. I've been there a couple of times for basketball, including a stirring rendition of Singing Country Roads with Billis and Seth Greenberg and Jay Williams at the time. And that, quick aside, another quick story on that. We did this little bit to open the show. And then the whole thing was we were doing it out in the country someplace, singing it a cappella. And then we were going to walk in our suits live and they would take it live. And as we walked in, because they had heard us sing, they'd already started singing, a whole huge crowd in basketball. And man, I mean, it would like choke you up. It was cool. So there's so much passion there. That would be a great stop if we get a chance to do that.
We'll let Sims do the a cappella singing. I'm gonna stay away from that assignment. I'm gonna stick to the ankle sprains and stay away from the a cappella.
I just hope it would be early enough in the season. I don't think it's going to go well for West Virginia this year, but it might be early enough in the season, and there'll certainly still be a ton of excitement surrounding the mighty Panthers coming to town.
I would love to go.
I would too.
I don't know what bodies of water Pat could jump in there, but he would find them and he would jump in them. So no, it would be electric. It would be great. Perfect. Be a fun homecoming to see and feel, because the one thing about the West Virginia crowds, I've covered a bunch of games there over the years, it is a visceral experience. They care there, man. They really, really care there. So that could be fun. Let's hope Game Day's country roads collide with those in Morgan.
It is just a shame, Pete, that the October 12th game that West Virginia has against Houston is not in Morgantown. That's in Houston with former Mountaineer coach Dana Holgerson and his maiden voyage with the Cougars in the Big 12. He comes in there losing a ton of guys. Lost Clayton Tune, the quarterback, lost Tank Dell, the wide receiver. We mentioned Alton McCaskill when we did our Pac-12 preview, who transferred from Houston to Colorado. So here come the Cougars, who also lost a couple of offensive line starters in the portal in the spring. They don't have a lot of experience. They've got like 10 bowl teams from last year on the schedule, including opening against a veteran, solid UTSA team in a non-conference game. And they have TCU early. They have to go to Texas Tech early. They do have Texas at home. The number on Houston is also 4.5. And looking at a tough game in the non-conference, and they do have a pretty good home schedule and getting some of them. I think they can get to 5, but not any better than that. But I think the number's a little low, so I'm going to take the over, but barely. But I don't really have a lot of optimism about them having a great first season in the Big 12.
Yeah, Donovan Smith's really talented. He really flashed at times at Texas Tech. So if there's a case for optimism, I would start it there. But I would generally agree. Patrick Paul's really good tackle. But yeah, there are a lot of unknowns there. By the way, they play at Rice week 2, which made me regret that I did not say earlier my favorite stat of this season. And that's that Rice quarterback JT Daniels is going to open the season at Texas. And it's going to be the 3rd different team he's played at Texas with in his career. And I think I've probably said it on the podcast before, but that's just worth repeating. That is just wondrously preposterous. So thank you to JT.
It's like the old school stories that I tell about the guys who were basically mercenary players in the early 1900s who would play week to week for different teams. Like Oregon faced a guy like 4 consecutive weeks playing for 4 different teams back in the day. It's sort of like JT's a modern day I can't recall that guy's name now. But
did you read Dave Revson's book?
Oh yeah,
like his history.
Yeah,
oh, it was excellent.
I read it. Was
did a really nice job.
To the fact that I often bring up the great kicker Pat O'Day from that, much to Herb Street's consternation. I actually, behind me, Revson, a while back, I've been remiss in my duty here. Revson sent me signed copies to all of them because they were all making fun of me for bringing up these things. I did it mostly to jab them. So Dave signed copies of the book and sent it to me. It is to send to them, and I'm going to get it to them now that I've said that.
I appreciate your historical affinity, Rece. I would not mock that. The inner college football nerd in me wants more obscure, 19aughts references on game day. So it really hits the TikTok crowd.
Well, you have to. Well, that's the thing. You have to be judicious with it, and it's sort of those. What do the kids like to say? If you know, you know, or something. So, and it's also a little shout out to Revson, and it's also just to sort of annoy Herb Street from time to time, or the other guys who don't have the same appreciation for that. But it's called The Opening Kickoff, and if you like the old school stuff, it's a great book to pick up, and you probably should.
It almost reads like fiction in a way. You know what I mean? Like we all know this stuff happened. It's really well done.
Yeah. So where did we leave off on Houston? Did we go?
I don't like them, and I'm taking the under.
Okay, you don't like them taking the under. I don't even remember what I said. I think I said they probably get to 5. It's 4.5.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of optimism. I think I said that before we went into our historical rant. I also don't feel great about Cincinnati. Cincinnati coming in, Scott Satterfield moving from Louisville. Not that Scott's not a good coach. He is. And Louisville probably played a little bit better than they got credit for last year. I found it to be a curious hire, in all honesty, after Luke Fickell left. But they're all new. They've got nobody back on offense. Emory Jones transferred in there, the former Arizona State and Florida quarterback. They still have Corey Kiner, who a while back transferred from LSU, the running back. But they're losing Ivan Pace. Ben Bryant, who had played quarterback for them, left. I don't know what to make of them. They only have one starter back on the offensive line, and a grand total by most calculations that I've read, right around 20 career FBS starts. They do have a couple of talented guys on defense coming back, including the Godfather, Dante Corleone. But I think he's got one scholarship receiver returning. I think this is going to be a tough year in the transition for Cincinnati. They also have a non-conference game at Pittsburgh. They've got Oklahoma on the schedule. They do miss Texas. Number for Cincinnati's 4.5. I'm going under there.
I'm going to go under 2. I do like their defense, though. Deshaun Pace was one of my favorite players in college football the year that Cincinnati made the college football playoff. And his brother Ivan came and kind of took the spotlight last year. I really feel like Deshaun Pace could play his way into being a top 50 NFL pick. He's really like one of those modern hybrid players who forces turnovers and wreaks havoc. I really, really loved his game, especially when it was sort of showcased well that year. So That said, and yeah, Dante Corleone, Malik Van's been there and been a really good player.
And he was hurt all last year. He was
Yeah.
on their playoff team. He was a big part of that, and he's back from injury, so that's certainly going to help.
Yeah, so there's some good older players on defense, but I agree. Like, here's the thing about these. Like, who the heck? Like, the Cincinnati coaches don't know what they have on offense right now, so it's hard for us to sit here and project it out. Emory Jones is who he is, right? He's a solid FBS quarterback, but he's never taken a team on his back and led them to 9 wins. So, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, this is a transition year in a lot of ways for Cincinnati, and I'm going to take the under.
So now we've gone through the Big 12 for the Big 12's last ride. And instead of it being in its current state, but it's going with the joining in 2024 of Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, certainly doesn't make up for the loss of Texas and Oklahoma, but it certainly casts the Big 12 in a much different light going forward and positions them perhaps to challenge the ACC for that quote-unquote third place conference behind the Big Ten and the SEC in whatever order you prefer to put them in.
Yes, and that will be an interesting debate going forward here, because I feel like the Big 12 has more programs that are deeply dedicated to football than the ACC. But clearly the top of the ACC is much better than going forward, assuming Florida State Clemson don't leave next week.
Right.
Going forward, they don't have the bell cow national title contender. But that doesn't mean we can't embrace the chaos and the fun race.
It's going to be great. So as we have for the others, does the Big 12 get a team for the second consecutive year into the college football playoff?
They do not.
And we need to disagree on one of these soon. We agreed that the Pac-12 will, and I agree that the Big 12 will not. Thanks for listening to our Big 12 conference preview. We'll continue on. There are a couple of significant conferences left to look ahead to, ACC and the SEC, coming up in the next few days. Thanks for listening and downloading the College Game Day Podcast wherever you prefer to get your podcast.